Okay. So we have been discussing the idea of the cheshbon hanefesh, the self-accounting. Elsewhere, Rav Mottel writes that for a great person, which we all are, somewhat, there's not like there's big days in the calendar and there's small days in the calendar. There's like Yom Kippur, and then there's Tuesday in July or something. By concerning other people, lesser people, the insignificant days, you don't really put much energy into. Just they sort of happen, and then you sort of really gear up for the real important days. Each person puts their energy and gives their time. So he says, but the bigger people, there's no difference between these days. Mm-hmm. Now, certainly, there are differences, but we don't make those differences. Mm-hmm. There's Yom Kippur, the Kedusha of Yom Kippur, the Kedusha of Purim, the Kedusha of Shabbos is certainly greater than other times. But for a great person, you're treating all the times with importance. So you're putting forth that energy. Mm-hmm. A similar thing, the cheshbon nefesh, making an accounting. So if you never really think about this, you maybe only think about this once in a year. In Yom Kippur, a person thinks about what they've done. But if you are been exposed to and you're beginning to train yourself to making a cheshbon, it's something that's constant. You're always examining yourself and asking yourself, how did it go in this encounter over here? Was that proper? How did I treat this mitzvah? How did I treat this person? How did I react in this situation? So the cheshbon nefesh is a constant. And the Svarim speak about special times for doing a cheshbon accounting. Especially I forgot who it is, it says, that's Abu Draham, or one of the early Svarim writes that at the end of each time is the time it's very ripe for tshuva. At the end of the year, you have Yom Kippur, and you have the end of each chodesh, each month, which is known as Yom Kippur Katan, the day before Rosh Chodesh is known as Yom Kippur Katan, small Yom Kippur. The end of each week, Erev Shabbos, time for tshuva. And I don't know if he says this, but it says at the end of each day.
Yeah, really.
So right before you're about to sort of make a new beginning, you have an opportunity to sort of clear out. Like on Rosh Chodesh, we say in the most Zman Kapara L'chol Todosam. It's a time of kapara for all creations. So that these times are made, they're really ripe for teshuvah, sort of to clean out, to clear it out. And we'll learn today what happens when a person doesn't do this type of cheshbon. Sort of like what happens to the person. But then, Erev Shabbos, to receive the sanctity of Shabbos, one does cheshbon. And all the way down to do something daily, which is a very proper practice that a person should review their day, review themselves as they behave in the day, and make a cheshbon, Okay, so we are up to the second column, second paragraph. It begins V'im. V'im achein yachol lios b'nei adam. If it's true, you may have people she'einam mizbonim b'chol hanal. They don't contemplate everything which we've been speaking about. So Mottel gave us examples how a person can contemplate their obligation in learning Torah. The ability to be able to pursue with the Kedusha of Shabbos. So examples. And making a cheshbon, how am I doing that? How am I doing that? How well am I doing that? So it takes a cheshbon, a person has to take a self-accounting to stop and think, well, am I treating it with the proper seriousness that it deserves? So while it's true, you can have people that are not thinking like in this way. Ve'einam samim alev. They don't take to heart cheshbonu shel olam, making an accounting. Shebevadai al hakol yavo l'din. It is certain that every single deed, every single word, thought, there is judgment for. The person is responsible for everything. And there is a judgment on everything. V'huhu ha'achrei al kol ma'asav. He's the one that's responsible for everything. So the responsibility rests with the individual concerning everything that comes from them. So if a person doesn't take to heart to make this cheshbon, muchach, it's very clear, she'ha'adam mu'urav im harbe psolas v'zu amas hanachash. It's clear that the person is mixed with so much negative things, detrimental things, what he calls the pollution of the snake. Shema'akev ba'ado ha'isbornos. It prevents the person from contemplation. In other words, a person can live in such a way that they don't come to that place of contemplation. Could be the person's never been exposed to the idea that one should really take a self-accounting and how serious it is. So it could be that person's never heard of the idea. But Mottel says it could be that a person is sort of so full of what he calls the pollution of the snake that it inhibits them from making a contemplation. In other words, a person is so accustomed to living in a certain way that they don't come to that place to even consider that there's what to make a cheshbon of, what to make an accounting of. I'll give you an example. The Gemara says that there are 24 things that prevent tshuva, different averos. The Rambam says it's not that if you do them that you won't come to you can't do tshuva. That it's you can't do tshuva, you can't return. It's just that the effect of doing these things creates such a blockage that it's very difficult for a person to come to tshuva. When you live in a certain way, in certain patterns, it's not so obvious that a person will come to tshuva. So you're very accustomed. Everything is very normal in this atmosphere, in this world that you live in, and the way people around you behave, and the way you're accustomed to it, that you don't come to that place of tshuva. Now, just to come to that place of tshuva and to making an accounting implies that there's a space within the person to sort of consider. Okay, and the pasuk in Eov says, "Ayer para adam yulad," that the man is born a wild donkey. Ubavades, therefore, certainly, im lo yanaka atzmo mehav. The person doesn't clean out. Yishar etzlo ta'arova shel zu amavashchasa. They'll remain with the remnants of destructive behaviors, destructive ways of thinking, and therefore not come to that place of tshuva. So there are certain sort of natural tendencies, what we would call the nefesh habahamis, is the instinctual person, that there are ways of thinking that unless we begin to clean out from ways of thinking like that, we may never come to tshuva. Like, for example, a person will say, well, it's just sort of natural to do that. That's normal. And there's an acceptance of behavior, let's say. Or everyone around you does it, so you don't consider otherwise. Let's say, simple things, when people talking during davening, something like that, talking during praying. We're speaking negatively about people. Sometimes it becomes such a norm in a person's own life, or within the atmosphere a person surrounds themselves, that to think otherwise would be pretty extraordinary step. You have to really sort of step out of that to consider otherwise. And therefore, if it's left unchecked, and a person doesn't begin to clean out some of these patterns of thinking, ways of behaving, then this could really spread within the person in many different ways. Bein adam l'makom, bein adam l'chavero. Concerning their relationship with Hashem, or concerning their relationship with people. So these types of behaviors or ways of thinking will slowly spread into the relationships that we have with Hashem, with people, and take hold of the person and then just lead them in that way. That's all normal. So, for example, you ever have the experience of going out into nature, and really not just rafting or canoeing, but just being quiet in nature, and a person may experience a great quieting within, and sort of a clearing out, that they're able to really view themselves and to think about themselves in a way that you're unable to really touch within the busy life. Then you don't even come to those types of thoughts. You don't come to these types of thoughts unless you're in that place. So imagine you never ever gave yourself the opportunity. So that means you're living in a certain pattern of thinking that you may never escape from. Or if a person lives in a certain environment, you surround yourself with certain people, and that's the norm. You may never ever consider otherwise. And this happens sometimes when you go on a trip to Israel or someplace, and all of a sudden, you're around different atmosphere, different people, and you consider otherwise. That's a very penetrating type of experience, because it cuts at the patterns of thinking that person has been conditioned to for many, many, many years. And suddenly it jolts them from that. So, example, kinas and eschinam, there are so many bad midos, negative character traits that slowly creep into a person's life between people. And it becomes normal. Kina, jealousy. So that's kind of hatred. Thinking negatively of others, expressing it. So Mottel says, "V'ha'etza ha'yechida," the singular advice, "Lifahifater ulinakos atzma mimeno," to really extract yourself and to cleanse yourself from all of this type of thing. Hu limud hamusar, to study musar. You study the area of Torah that really speaks directly about this, and to learn the words and to absorb the ideas. That is the most active thing that a person can do to position themselves to think otherwise. Sha'al yado bevada yisorer. If a person does that, certainly they'll be inspired, they'll be aroused, lachshov cheshbon shalom, to start to really contemplate their own life. B'chovaso ba'alamo, their obligation, ulizbonin aleha b'ritzinus mesirus, and to contemplate it with a type of seriousness. So, what the Limud HaMusar does is that it takes these ideas, these concepts that a person has heard about, and it really sort of helps you raise it to the surface of your thinking. Not just an idea that you've heard, but it really helps you raise it to your own consciousness, to begin to think about it within your own life. Hayotzi midvarenu, the outcome of what we were saying is the following. It is certainly a pressing matter for a person in this world. One must live with this idea, this practice of an accounting of the soul. And the accounting is linked into the Musar, because you can only make an accounting when a person's really absorbing these ideas, the proper ideas. Like was mentioned before, is what the modern relationship with mindfulness is only as beneficial as what's on your mind, what's going into your mind. So for that, you only make the cheshbon when we hear what these proper midos are. So we go to these tzaddikim, we go to these svarim, these holy people that really portray the midos as what they are, like a sefer like the Mesilas Yesharim that we're studying teachings on, and others, without any input from the person, just reading the sefer, just reading it very simply. And then a person can absorb what these midos are, and then one can make a cheshbon. Or else the person begins to justify or interpret the way they're living according to how they understand. Then you likely have an erroneous sort of cheshbon, calculation. Ulahakir sheben adam achrei al kol maasav. The recognition that a person is responsible for all their deeds. Ulakabel al atzmu es avdus Hashem beritzinus meleya uvetvia mechayeves, and to accept upon oneself the service of God with a complete seriousness and an obligation. This can only be achieved when a person sets aside time for this study. We should also mention that when a person is making a cheshbon, self-accounting, a person can recognize the positive, should recognize the positive, to see how they did well when reviewing and viewing themselves. To encourage oneself in that also. It's part of the cheshbon. It's part of an accounting, is where you made gains. Okay, so that is his concluding words on this topic of the cheshbon, the accounting, which comes along when a person begins to set aside time for studying this very broad topic known as Musar, which is in the study of the kochos hanefesh, the studies of the powers of the soul and of the proper ways of conduct in the Torah. Okay, so we turn the page here. And the title, Hayachas l'musar kachachma amuka, relating to Musar as a deep wisdom. Chachmas ha-musar hu chachma amuka. The wisdom of Musar is a very deep wisdom. Shemadriches machshavto shel adam. It guides the thinking of man, lihisbonein b'chul shosav, to contemplate general weakness or tendencies that are inherent in man. Umalamdo, it teaches one eich lihifagesh osam hachusos, how to encounter them. See, in other words, whenever you have an area of wisdom, you're talking about it's an analysis of something, and it conceptualizes things and gives understanding. So the Chacham of Musar has to do with man, the person, and so the natural tendencies of a person, behaviors, ways of thinking, kochos, powers, and recognition of them, and how to encounter and sort of deal with them, both in the positive, how to raise and elevate, and also on the side of the negative, how to recognize and to curb and to transform. So what it does is it's the wisdom of the person, how the behaviors of the person, but down to the core, all the way down to the soul. As anyone that studied Tanya, or something like that, recognize that you're not just speaking about the mind of the person, but all the way down to the very core elements of what make up a person. What we would call the kochos hanefesh, the powers of the soul. Although when a person may read it, a person will say, well, it's sort of like a self-help. A person will think it's sort of self-help book, and it talks about, ideas that are really simple. It's not what Musar is. The Chacham Musar is extremely deep. It penetrates all the way into the person's thinking that often eludes the person, and even deeper than that, into almost natural tendencies of the human that are not even recognizable to our thought. In other words, just like we have reflexes, and we say, well, we just sort of do that. And this type of chachma penetrates down to understanding, well, why do you do that? What's the cause of that? What's the source of that? And then personal to the person, well, why do we do that? Why does the person do that? Umalamdo, it teaches one how to encounter them. V'gam miyayites, and advises how to heal them, how to repair them, and to literally transform from one end to the other. A person can literally take a way of behavior, even deeper, a characteristic, and really transform it to a completely different expression within the person. As written, also found in Eov. Hein yiras Hashem hi chachma. It says the fear of God is wisdom. The fear of God is another term for this area called Musar. And the Mottel Shalom writes that the word hein, it means it is, to the exclusion of everything else. Yiras Hashem, that's wisdom. If you want to know what's true wisdom, is Yiras Hashem, this area of Musar. So Mottel is a very good example. What you may be thinking about, how this, what is related to. It says, "Kamosha hayom," today in the world, nisgala v'nispateach bu'umos ha'olam chachmas hafisichologia. That is
psychology.
Yeah. See, today, the whole area of psychology has developed. Right? Before that was a developed wisdom, right? So we had very little understanding within the human psyche and the behavior, and that developed as a whole wisdom to understand, man and man's behavior. So similar to that, shu chachma hamefateach umegala ma'alosa v'chulshosav shel adam. It's a type of wisdom that has opened up and exposed virtues of man, the weakness of man. Umenasan l'rafosam, and it seeks to be able to heal a person, to be able to go into that place, to understand man's psyche, and to help each person in correcting certain ways of thinking. One has to know that there is a deep and holy wisdom, heilige physiologia, holy psychology. Shu chachma as a Musar is. So Musar is the holy psychology. It's the holy. In other words, when we learn this, especially as I mentioned, you learn a sefer like Tanya and Svarim, you're going deeper than a person's thought, and even deeper than the psyche, but down to the soul itself, which is the repository, the source of all this. Nefesh HaBahamis, which is the source of all the natural behaviors of a person as they are a human creature. The neshama, as it is, as all the holy characteristics, and to understand them. It guides a person in encountering and correcting the weaknesses, his tendencies. So that's what the area of the Chachmas HaMusar, Yiras Hashem, that's where it's sort of penetrates to. For example, if you learn Rav Nachman's farm, so Rav Nachman links many characteristics, one to the other, like in a chain. Like I'll say, this, if you do this, then it'll lead you to that. And if you do this, it'll lead you to that. And he creates this whole chain of linkage that is unrecognizable to a person when you learn it. So the relationship between these things are not evident and not rational to us. But he understands the whole of the person and the whole of midos and how they're linked one to each other. And then if a person will sort of press here, it'll make effect over there. If a person will press over here, it'll make effect over there. And then so on. So if a person starts in this place, it'll set off, help them in a different area. So that type of penetration, which often is beyond being able to rationally connect things or midos. It has to do with a linkage within the neshama, the soul. Top of the page here. Uvechachmas hapsychologia yesh chachamim gedolim v'yeduim hamekubalim kebekim b'hachachma. In the area, let's say, of psychology, there are great, wise people that are accepted as experts in the wisdom. Ulu'umaso chachmas hamusar einu mekubal kachachma muka. But the area of Musar is not generally seen by people as being a deep wisdom. People relate to it as sort of like, a self-help, or, just do it, being a better person type of thing, and these simplistic sort of teachings. Viragil b'das hamon ki'inyan hadrachal avoda masis. Many think of it as guidance to practical service, fruma avoda. Service having to do with being religious. It's just how to practically be better. Like for example, so you should smile. If you want to be happy, you should smile. Sort of these types of ideas, right? Which are good ideas and very nice ideas. But we don't relate to it necessarily as like a deep wisdom. Sort of, good practice for good living types of things. V'nitan lomar shelachein nizgala umufatz k'hayom chachmas hapsychologia. One can say that indeed, for this purpose, the wisdom of psychology has become known in the world. It is less than the wisdom of Yiras Hashem. Is not of the degree of wisdom of what Musar really is. Shechein heim einam shayachim liyiras Hashem. It doesn't necessarily pertain to Yiras Hashem. V'rov de'osem heim neged v'hipach haTorah. Many approaches, many things that are accepted as concepts are in opposition to the Torah. The Torah, and when the Torah understands as sort of the human being, the person, and what would be proper is not necessarily aligned with the general wisdom of psychology. V'nigram me'achma shechachmas hamusar lo zachsha sheteskal bo kachachma mukarai. And because he's saying, because the wisdom of Musar has not been properly accepted, so this in turn has sort of taken its proper place. And so really, if we were able to relate to the area of Musar and to really penetrate deeply with it, then we would give it its proper place and not simply discard it for the simplistic teachings and look elsewhere for trying to discover the depth of the man. But rather we would try and find within the area of Musar that wisdom which would be proper guidance for ourselves, for our neshama. Certainly these two wisdoms are not equal. Ki chachmas hapsychologia novea me'ezo psolas nitzotzei kedusha shenafla sitra acha shneshavu lachachma zo. This wisdom can be said to sort of emanate from a holy source, but it's expressed in ways that are not holy and not aligned with Kedusha. Ulu maso, in opposition to this, Chachmas HaMusar hi Chachma Kedosha. Chachma of Musar is a holy wisdom. Hamalamedas as Adam heichlios oven Hashem, teaches a person how to be a servant of God, ba'amkus, in a depth, ba'ofen shia ba'al madrega, in a way that a person can really become a person of spiritual stature. I'll give you an example of something I encountered in the approach that was shared with me by a psychologist. He said that they divide between what would be problematic pornography and what they call, quote, mainstream pornography. This is the language he told me. And that's, he said, mainstream pornography is, is perfectly okay, perfectly acceptable. It's only when a person starts to deviate into areas that are really problematic and troubling that is an issue.
What does that mean?
So, so when you think about that, and you think about the effects of what you're saying by that, is the effects of accepting this and calling it mainstream and acceptable means that many of the negative behaviors and ways of thinking that as a result of looking at that, you're accepting, including areas that are going to create problems in basic relationship between man and wife. But since you've labeled it mainstream and acceptable and don't see it as a problem, that is going to further encourage basic breakdown within a relationship. So it doesn't start from a place of any sense of kedusha, of sanctity. And because it doesn't, so then these roads are often on very divergent paths. And you certainly aren't going to create an elevated person through that. Not only, but you actually could be encouraging a lot of the disturbing and very troubling points of issues within relationships by accepting that. And many other examples where, what's your point of origin? Where are you beginning from? That is an acceptable point. So in the Torah, we're trying to create not only a healthy person, but yes, a healthy person, but an elevated person. And so that's a complex thing. So how do you encounter with and deal with a lot of the tendencies that are normal and are natural and maybe mainstream, but in a way that doesn't necessarily accept that, right? It's not okay with it, but seeks to elevate a person through it. And that's not a simple thing, because you have to navigate pathways that are first understanding of what it is, and can help a person approach it in a very honest and direct way, but has as its goal elevation. So, whereas there are many benefits to the wisdom psychology, and it certainly is beneficial, you have to first examine sort of your point of origin and your point of a goal, to be able to sometimes distinguish between these two paths, and to understand where is this heading, where is it going toward. And it's very relevant to basic parent-child relationships, of respect, ways of speaking, that these two paths are very divergent. And they say, well, a healthy relationship between a parent and a child versus a sense of respect, ideas of equality, and being able to distinguish that from basic Torah concept that a parent is a greater. And how is that sort of manifest in parent-child relationship, where there is sort of in a sense a friendship, but there's also still that sense of the parent is greater, right? And that's going to express itself in how children relate to the parents, how they speak to them, and then how you deal with parent-child relationships. So this is not, the area of wisdom of Musar is not just psychology. It's not psychology. I mean, it's the Chachma of Musar. There'll be similarities and there'll be relationships between the two, but there'll be points that are very, very different one from the other, and will set a different course, very different course, and the person and what one's really seeking out of it. And the Torah is seeking, it says, a Baal Madrega, holiness. Mesilas Yesharim is built on this. To explain and to expose the depth of the wisdom of Musar and its points of elevation. And it's seeking to really to help develop a holy person, like the Katzkers who say, Anshe Kodesh Chiuni, Heilig Menschen. Heilig Menschen. This means mention people that are holy. It's not just trying to create a mensch. Be a mensch. Be a mensch means be a decent person. It's not just like, I want my child to be a mensch. Well, that's an important beginning. On the other hand, it's not just heilig, holy, with not recognizing the mensch, the human that's there. Heilig Menschen. Heilig Menschen is this concept of the recognition of the human being and everything that is part of a human, but seeking to halik, to be holy through it. That's the descriptive of the path of the depth of Musar of Yiras Hashem. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good day and a good week.
Mm-hmm.